Right, hello everybody. Hi everyone, are we having fun? Are we enjoying ourselves? A tsunami of joy and outburst and everything. So welcome to this breakout session. This breakout session is specifically looking at the challenges facing care leavers around homelessness, which we know is obviously a significant issue. The panel will introduce themselves in a second, but my name is Ed Tytherleigh. I do wear a few hats, but for this purpose, I'm the Director of Services for Centrepoint, the youth homeless charity. So we've got 1 hour, and I hope that we can both frame the challenge around care leavers and homelessness, but then also hopefully then get into the positives, looking at solutions as well. So what we can do first simply is go around the panel and ask everyone to introduce themselves. So hopefully they'll be nice and quick and speedy. Shall I hand the mic? So we'll start over here.
Hi everybody, I'm Lisa Braden. I'm Head of Business Development at Settle. We're a charity that is working to prevent homelessness for young people who are aged 18 to 25 at the key transition point of moving into their first property, into their first home.
Hi, I'm Katherine Sacks-Jones. I'm Chief Executive of Become. We're the national charity in England for children in care and young care leavers.
Brilliant.
Hi, I'm Bianca Robinson. I run the CEO Sleep Out charity. A bit different to people who work directly with people who've experienced care, but my audience is SME businesses and business leaders. So primarily wanting to make sure my message is aligned and get behind the big call today to add care leaving as a protected characteristic in the Equality Act 2010.
Hi, I'm Kerry Nicol. I'm Support Services Manager at the Rees Foundation. We're a charity that supports care experienced people of all ages, so we don't stop at 25. We have a small accommodation project that Ian, my colleague, has also been involved with. So.
Hello everyone, my name's Ian Thomas. I work with the Rees Foundation today and background in social work, criminology, and currently a PhD student. We've also lived experience of care, custody and homelessness.
Thank you. Hi folks, I'm Jean Templeton. I'm Chief Executive of St Basil's. We work with young people in the West Midlands who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, 16 to 25-year-olds, including care leavers and care experienced. I also chair the West Midlands Combined Authorities Homelessness Task Force, and our objective is designing out homelessness.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. So I'm contractually bound to mention the pledge tree, which is there. So obviously you'll be so inspired and make some personal commitments. So it's a psychological tool for people to make commitments about what they'll do in all the breakout sessions. So please, at the end, or if you're inspired in the middle, feel free to add something to the pledge tree. I hope from the panel we've got a real diversity of opinion as we'll kind of create quite a rich conversation. As I say, we're going to first do the challenges, but then we're going to look at some of the successes and positives and solutions. Someone came up to me after the last session and we should do more audience participation. So it's meant to be a panel discussion, but if you can add to it or you want to really challenge us, because people held us feet to the fire in the last session, please do put your hand up. We'll try and involve you, but please empathise that this is meant to be a panel discussion, but we want to make it as interactive as we possibly can. So with that, I will get on and I will ask the first question. I'll choose the order. I might start at that end, but the first question is just for the panel to reflect and share the particular challenge, especially around those who are experiencing care and obviously moving on from the care system. But Lisa, I am looking at you, so if you're happy, I'll pass the mic.
No worries. Yes, so obviously we're working with young people at the point that they are moving on, and I think some of the big issues that we see is obviously that there's kind of quite scary stats about 1 in 3 young people becoming homeless within that first 2 years of leaving care, as well as kind of a lot of young people feeling like they were forced to move on sooner than they were ready, and not feeling prepared for kind of moving on. And I guess for us, what we're seeing is kind of a lot of young people kind of really struggling. I think housing availability in stock, I think we talked about housing earlier in an earlier breakout session, but I think also the kind of suitability of that housing. I think one of our young advocates mentioned the lack of choice, often being given one choice when they are given a property, and should be felt, you know, they should feel lucky that they're given one property, even though it might not be suitable, whether that's the property itself needs repair issues, they're dealing with kind of, you know, moving in and there's no gas, you know, moving in and kind of really struggling kind of with that, and also just the lack of support that they are given to kind of manage that and expected to kind of do it independently. And I think that's one of the things that we really sort of want to kind of tackle, is that, you know, they are moving on a lot sooner than their peers, and actually the expectation that they know what they need to know, you know, that they should be able to do it. And I think, yeah, giving young people kind of the support that they need to be able to do that is really important.
Just introduce. Hi, yeah. Sorry for late. I was stuck in another room with somebody else having a conversation. Mark Riddell, the National Advisor for Care Leavers in government, but sit in Department for Education. My role covers three things quickly. One is about going out to local authorities and supporting them with their local offer to try and get them to be the best in the country, because we know that local authorities have got better outcomes for children in care and care leavers, that actually they become better lives through health, through housing, through DWP, through education, employment and training. So my first job is to go out to local authorities. So if you've got a local authority that's in the room today that haven't been to them, and you're sitting worried about where Ofsted are with you in relation to inadequate or required improvement, give me a shout, drop me an email, and I'll come and challenge your corporate parents to do a bit better offer. The second bit that I do is that I sit on a ministerial board, which is an interministerial board, so it sits in government. It's chaired by my boss, the Secretary of State, and Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister. So we've got care leavers at a really high level in government, and that's about where I go and challenge some of those ministers about having a national offer. You know, it's a bit of a nonsense that we've got council tax exemption in 128 local authorities in the country. Why have we not got a national offer so that we make sure that all young people have that? Why have we got transport in Liverpool but not a free transport offer across the country? So my job is to go and challenge ministers. And then the third bit really is talking to the kids. Everything I did as a head of children's services up in Manchester many years ago was based on what would I do if it was my kids. So my challenge to everybody in the room is, if you're looking at a policy, a bit like Terry talks about protected characteristics, if you're looking at a policy that you do and you wouldn't do it to your own kids, challenge your corporate parents, go back to your managers and say, why are we doing this for our kids? So that's what my challenge is in relation to corporate parenting as well.
Thanks. So the question was the challenge.
Challenges, drivers, causes, why homelessness is a particular issue for care leavers.
I think the 1 in 3 statistic is a really sobering one, and it's a sobering number, but when we think about what it represents, homelessness is the lack of a home, and for most of us, home is such an important part of our lives, where we feel secure, where we feel safe, where we feel stable. So for 1 in 3 of our young people leaving care, they find themselves without that stability, without that security, without that safety. And without those things that home represents, it's very, very hard to take those first steps into adulthood, to go on to education, to move into employment if you don't have that basic necessity of a stable home. But sadly, that is the reality for many of our young people, and that might mean they're sofa surfing, they're in temporary accommodation, they're rough sleeping, and we know that the rough sleeper numbers contain a high proportion of people who have been in the care system as children. So it's hugely significant, and sadly we know the problem is getting worse. Over the last 5 years there's been a 54% increase in the numbers of young people leaving care and presenting as homeless to their local authority. So there are really, really significant challenges there. One of the things that we here at Become, and we run a national helpline for young people, and it's housing and homelessness features as one of the top 3 most consistently raised concerns by young people. And one of the things they talk to us about is the care cliff that they face when they come to leave the care system when they turn 18. That happens often really abruptly. literally on their 18th birthday. So when other young people might be in the middle of exams or thinking about how to celebrate, young people are worrying about what they're going to do when they're expected to become independent overnight and need to find somewhere to live. And sadly, for too many young people, that managed transition is not there. They don't get the support that they need early enough, and so they do end up facing homelessness. I think it is an absolute travesty that so many young people who have been under the care of the state go on to take those first steps into adulthood without the stability of a home. And I think without fixing the homelessness crisis facing our young people, it's very difficult to see how we will support them more broadly in life to take those important first steps into adulthood. So it's really good that we're having this conversation today, and we urgently do need to see action so that all young people leaving care have a stable, a safe and a secure home so that they take those first steps into adulthood.
I'm trying hard not to intervene, so I will pass it on straight to Bianca.
Thank you. So, yeah, the cliff edge is quite a shocking thing. I've just, my 25-year-old twins have just made their own life in New Zealand, but they're 25, and that's 7 years after somebody in care is expected to go and make their own life with no support. It drops off. It's that, Terry said it, the care cliff. So I work with business. I see business leaders every day. I sleep out with them regularly in 20 to 30 cities across the UK every year. And I take a message to them. And I think that message, when you're lying in your sleeping bag and you're on the cold floor, we sprinkle a bit of fairy dust over you, and it's the question, what more can you do? I think if you're in business, you've definitely got skin in the game, especially if you're an SME, which makes up the power base in the UK. SME businesses make up this huge power base. So leaders of SMEs, they have an opportunity, they have power together, and they have a responsibility to think, how can I in business strengthen the fabric of society? And so we're always offering them ways in which they can do that. Once they've done that sleeper, that's kind of like the gateway drug, and then they go on and they think about what more can they do. And educating them about this issue is one of those vital things. When you're talking about 1 in 3, it's quite easy just to say 1 in 3, 1 in 3. It doesn't hit home. 1 in 3 care leavers go on that short walk to homelessness. It can't be right. It's not acceptable. We really do have to push for this change. So for my part, my piece of the puzzle is saying to business, look, let's unlock some more understanding around what being a care leaver means. Let's look at how can we bring young people into our businesses to give them work experiences, to create pathways, to put ladders down into those hard-to-reach communities, to bring people up through, to create aspiration, to create jobs, and to not discriminate. I think when we look at the figures, the smoking gun, there's no real smoking gun there as to why these young people aren't finding their way into the jobs that people who haven't had the care experience do. But it really is, it's that unconscious bias discrimination, not wanting to take on someone who might have had a chaotic life. And so when we get this built in to the Equality Act, that could easily transform one of those big barriers. So thank you, that's my piece of the puzzle.
2 mics, thank you. I think, as Katherine said, one of the big issues for care leavers is that forced having to leave care at 18. It's not about whether they're ready. It's not about whether there's the right place for them to go to. And we know that young people generally are staying at home much, much longer, and it's sort of mid-20s that people generally leave home. Or you make a decision to leave home because you want to move in with your partner. So between the two of you, you might move out at 19, 20, relatively young, share somewhere, and then when you split up, go back home to mum and dad. Or you go to university, and then at the end of that, you might go back home to mum and dad. But actually, our care experience people don't have that opportunity. And what we see at Rees is that that can continue even beyond 25, that homelessness is still an issue because those building blocks weren't in place at the right point. And failure can kind of happen because of that. And we, in our housing project, we've supported a relatively small number of care experienced people, but they're all people who actually were homeless and couldn't access housing through other routes because they'd accrued rent arrears or because they'd got a criminal record or, you know, and I think these are some of the barriers that are in place. So for me, one of the, you know, the biggest issue perhaps is not being able to do it at the right time. So that then impacts on sufficiency as well. You know, it's about what has your council got available at that time. It's not, and it might mean moving out of the town where you've got a support network to, it might be another town in your county, but it's the other end of the world to you if you're only 18 and you've never been away from your town before. So the fact that you're forced to do it at 18 when you're not particularly ready feeds into homelessness, and the fact that then if things don't work out for you, there isn't that fallback plan of having parents around to bail you out that also contributes to homelessness for care experienced people.
Yeah, I think something that often gets overlooked in the research is that the disproportionate emotional and psychological responsibility that care leavers are kind of, you know, that has been bestowed upon them to live with, you know, the traumatic experiences that they've been through. And, you know, and often we don't talk about that much when we talk about leaving care. We talk about independence, we talk about employment, education, accommodation, you know, but as somebody who kind of has been street homeless and living in car parks, you know, in my early 20s and through all the prison system and, you know, spent most of my late teens in and out of prisons up and down the south coast of England, the adhesive that was binding, you know, those adversities together was trauma. You know, people were deeply, deeply traumatized, and it impacts somebody's, you know, subjective reality completely. Therefore, that's the reality they're experiencing. And it's interesting, even as I'm sat here now, a minute ago, I was thinking, all these faces look so serious. And then I thought, I really feel like I've done something wrong. And then I thought, God, I'm projecting my shame onto the audience, and I'm thinking that they're thinking terrible things of me. And I only know that because I've done the psychological work on myself, and, well, there's no static accomplishment, let me tell you that. But, you know, I do that, and I can understand what I'm projecting onto the world around me and start to sort of disseminate that, you know, their belief systems are the engine that's driving that behaviour and so on and so forth. And so I think what we really need to talk about is not just sort of, trauma-informed care, because we have to be really careful in that arena because we risk pathologising people, just aspiring to contain symptoms. And I do think what we really need to be talking about is healing. How do we heal trauma? What does healing look like? How is it achieved? And ideas from the East and the West and so on and so forth. And that's actually what my PhD is in, or will be in, God willing. But I think, you know, but that being said, trauma-informed care is really important, you know, promoting agency, creating safety, and they're all conducive to, you know, things that people say that feel healing. But I think we need to forge clearer pathways and let that be the adhesive of the solutions and interventions we do, like trauma is the adhesive of the multifaceted phenomenon of homelessness.
Wow. I'm glad I sat next to you, not. Oh no, that's yeah. So challenge, and I think it sort of it carries on from your point, Ian, really, that trauma. So what do? We compound that trauma by over-relying on the homelessness system as the route into housing for young people that are leaving care. So there are the cliff edges. There's the care leaver cliff edge, and we have a number of youth hubs that are the single points of access for 16 to 25-year-olds in the area that are homeless in the areas we work in. And sadly, and you wouldn't believe this, but we have social workers bringing young people on their 18th birthday to spend the day making a homeless application in the youth hub. Now, who would do that? Not bad people, not bad, but the system of relying on, the housing offer. that must be through the homelessness system. So for me, there's loads and loads of challenges that people have talked about. But that lack of preparation, lack of planning, lack of understanding that there does need to be a housing option which enables the young people to do whatever, whether it's education, further education, higher education, apprenticeships, jobs, whatever, having time out, traveling, whatever. There has to be some kind of planned safe housing option, because sadly we do not have a housing offer for youth in this country.
Yeah, no, just I think for me, I mean, I said earlier on that I've travelled to about 80 local authorities in the last sort of 7 years, and you know, what I see some of the best practice is where young people go onto the housing register at 16. So they do it after they follow an independent living skills workbook program. So they might do that while they're in foster care. They might do that when they're in a children's home. And they might do it after their 16th birthday if they're living with a semi-independent provider. But at the point where they turn 16, the housing application starts clicking. So by the time they get to 18, they've already got 2 years on the waiting list for an accommodation option. It's a real challenge. Don't get me wrong, that's a real challenge. And I've been all the way from Turkey, which is a very holiday-let place. I've got no social housing at all. But the reality is that they've worked with their registered providers, they're working with their landlords, they're bringing everybody together to be corporate parents into the room and saying, like for Torquay, which is Torbay Council, for one example, they've got about 350 care leavers between the age of 18 and 25. What I said to them was, how many care leavers have you got that would need some type of housing option in the next 12 months? So the ones that are maybe coming out of foster care, maybe coming out of a children's home, don't want to do staying close, don't want to do staying put, but feel ready to live independent because they've got the skills, the independent living skills to do that. The answer out of 350 care leavers between 18 and 25 was 32. So there was 32 care leavers in the next 12 months that would need a bedsit, 1 bedroom, or perhaps a young mum and dad who would need a 2-bedroom because they've got a baby or a child. 32. When they brought their registered providers together, they managed to get 75 properties. Now, every time I hear that we've got a housing crisis, I get that, absolutely. But there is some real innovation in the system that we don't use as a particular framework, and absolutely about the trauma, getting young people ready. We've got to do that a lot sooner and just not doing it when they're 18, 19, 20. We've got to be doing that when they're in children in care. But that bit of, what I said earlier this morning, that was in one local authority where they had 35 care leavers were due to leave care at 18, and they've got 300 voids. They've got 300 empty properties in that one local authority. That's the bit I don't understand. So when we say we've got no property, so if you go to a big registered provider, like Clarion, for example, they've got 10,000 properties across London, and what they'll always say is, we've always got a 5% void rate. People are being evicted, tenancies that need to be sorted, we need to spend some money on them, we need to reinvest, we need to build, all that sort of stuff. They've always got 500 properties in Clarion. So why don't we say, for those 500 properties, I've got 3 kids in Lambeth, can they have 3 of those properties as a direct let without having to go through all that nonsense bidding processes? What we say is, let's have a housing panel, we sit down, young people ready for that type of tenancy, and let's get it right. So the best local authorities do it. The worst local authorities say to me, we've got no social housing. When I ask them about the voids, they've got hundreds. Now, I was saying, a bit like Terry, I was saying a bit earlier on that I grew up in the care system. If you said to me when I was 17 that we've got a 1-bedroom flat in the council estate that I grew up in, which was a tough council estate, I knew all the drug dealers, I knew everybody who lived on the street, I knew the ones that were breaking and nicking our videos, I knew them all in those days, and it was videos in those days, in the 80s, no DVDs. I knew if people were breaking into the house. I could have quite easily gone and looked at that 1-bedroom property and said, I'll manage that property. But what we do is we go the hard-to-let properties. We're not going to place young people in those areas. We've got to give a little bit of choice back to young people. If it's too risky, we just don't do it. But let them have a look at it. Let them have a look at it. Not look at it when it's empty and it's got rats and it's got double glazing, that broken windows, lack of security, damp and mold. Let them look at it, the property, when you've spent the void money, £5,000 that local authorities have to do up properties by putting in carpets, white goods, bed, wardrobe, curtains, a white goods package, fridge, freezer, microwave. I guarantee you that any care leaver in this country would say, I'll take that option, thank you very much. So there's something about, we've got to get away from the narrative that there isn't nowhere for these kids to live. You get lots of local authorities that are doing 106 builds. So brand new builds, and Terry will talk about brand new builds, that they're saying every time we sell a piece of the King's land to a housing developer, we want 10% for children, families, and for care leavers. Now, a 500 build in Manchester is about, probably if you said 10%, 50 properties. It's better than saying to me, you've got nothing. I don't want to own the properties. I just want you to be able to pay an affordable rent. In Manchester, an affordable rent is £1,200 a week. So care leavers have got absolutely no chance unless you become a doctor or a paediatrician or you become a specialist tradesperson where you could earn that sort of money in a month. I want affordable rents to be affordable. So when you talk to Centrepoint, who are here in London, Centrepoint will say that when you come to one of our properties, it's a third of your wage. That's our rent. Now, I got told when I was leaving care, if you earn £1,000 a month or £1,000 a week, which would be quite nice, if you earn £1,000 a month, your rent should be about £300 because you need to live on the other £700. Now, I learnt that as a corporate parent. I learnt that from my corporate parents many years ago. So we've got to get away. Everybody in the room, and again, everybody in the One Summit, need to go back to their local authority and say, what's the detail of how many care leavers we've got that need a housing option in the next 12 months? So it's not 350 or 900 like in Croydon. It's a very smaller number. And I reckon there's properties that young people could live in. So that's the point. I think we've got to just challenge the narrative. But they don't give them a void that's got nothing in it. You've got to give them something like I would have done with my kids.
Thank you, Mark. You're almost segueing into the second part, but that's good. So, no, just to be the jam in the sandwich, I will kind of just reflect on a few things. I think defining homelessness is quite key for this debate, because some people kind of have this vision about rough sleeping, but actually homelessness is far broader than that. And nor is it just about a roof. People talk about homelessness in a home, but it's about security of tenure. It's about a sense of safety. And all that comes with that. And I think people go, oh, I've discharged my homelessness duty. Well, you haven't really, because that person's deeply marginalised and going backwards rapidly. I thought I'd talk about numbers quickly. I kind of thought I could have said this at the beginning. But last year, 136,000 18 to 25-year-olds presented to a local authority seeking support around homelessness. And around a third of those were care leavers. So that puts you into around 40-odd thousand care leavers who sought local authority support for housing. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned, but we're going to get into solutions now, I'm not supposed to talk, am I? But anyway, is the Children's Act, because obviously that has Section 17, Section 21, that puts an obligation on local authorities to house. But Mark, you said something right at the beginning about consistency, and there is no consistency, so why can't we actually make it an equitable, consistent offer that every person who has care experience is actually guaranteed that safety net through to 25, instead of going through assessments and unsuitable accommodation, and who wants to move into a B&B when there's a drug dealer next door, or an adult hostel, or whatever it might be. It just isn't a suitable home. So there are some reflections, but let's try and change the narrative. We're about just halfway through, panel, hint, just over halfway through. But this is about kind of the solution. So either kind of systemic change we can make, or I'll just bundle in as well examples of projects that you're involved in, examples of work that you know about that have really worked. So kind of that policy level, or indeed about specific projects and solutions that you know about. So should we follow the same order? Lisa, you're happy? And we'll go on to the solutions. So you've got a mic.
Yeah, I mean, on a practical level, our project it is working directly with care experienced young people at the point that they're moving on, and we're working in partnership with local authorities, with housing associations, with other charities to try and identify the right young people at the right time. So it is about supporting that transition so that as they're moving on, it's not about crisis management, it's not about dealing with young people at the point that they're potentially going to become homeless, but actually trying to get in there and do preventative work. You know, they work alongside our accredited coaches, one-to-one, once a week, kind of for up to 6 months. It can be longer. It's tailored to each young person, and it's about them setting the goals. And I think one of the big things for us is it's not about us doing it for them. It's about just giving young people the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence to do it for themselves. And I think that is really important. I think that's the one thing our coaches would say is these young people have got the ability to do it. We just need to give them the knowledge and how to do it and make them confident to be able to do it. You know, that's having kind of, you know, three-way calls with energy providers to get the best deals, you know, knowing what deals are available. You know, it's stuff that we assume young people should just go off and be able to do. And, you know, we would all struggle with that. And I think it's really important. And, you know, making sure that there is mental health support around that. You know, just because they've moved on doesn't mean that they're not going to be dealing with the ongoing trauma of the things that they've experienced. So making sure that they can get the right mental health support at the right time, making sure there are financial grants that they can access, and making sure that those are available. You know, £3,000 is not a lot to like furnish an entire property. Like, how many of us could do that? And particularly if you've got to furnish and put in flooring into all of your property, that takes up a huge amount of the young people's kind of, you know, setting up home allowances. You know, so we actually, I guess on a systemic level, you know, we need to make sure that the quality of the housing young people are moving into is appropriate. We need to make sure they've got enough money to live well. You know, you can't budget your way out of poverty. Like, that is just the reality. And we need to make sure that young people have like trusted relationships and people that are there to support them to do that. From Become's perspective, the first thing is that we need to end the care cliff so that young people don't need to leave the care system, aren't forced to leave the care system before they feel ready. Young people often say to me, I don't like being called a care leaver because I didn't leave care, it left me. And that really sticks with me. And I think, you know, we wouldn't expect of other young people that overnight they become independent and expected to live on their own. And we shouldn't expect that of our young people in care. So that means extending schemes like staying put so young people can stay with foster carers past their 18th birthday, expanding staying close so they can stay connected to support, and working with young people so that they make a managed transition out of care at a time that works for them, not at an arbitrary age deadline. I think the second thing is proper housing support, so thinking about where that young person's going to live, what's right for them, and that's about giving a young person agency in that decision as well. All young people are different, and different solutions are going to work for young people, so that needs proper consideration, including access to the private rented sector, which can be really difficult for young people who don't have a rent guarantor with parents or a deposit for rent in advance. So we'd like to see more councils providing that as an option as well. I really agree with the you can't budget your way out of poverty. I think we spend too much time talking about young people learning financial literacy skills and how to manage things, when actually the problem is not the young people's awareness, it's the systemic issues that are putting them in poverty in the first place. Within that, the lower rate of universal credit for under 25-year-olds, which is just not enough at £70 a week for young people to live off, and traps many in debt and homelessness, really needs addressing. At Become, we're really worried about some of the proposals coming out of government to reduce the support available for young disabled people, and we know that young care leavers are more likely to have special educational needs and to have other disabilities, and we're really worried that some of our most vulnerable young people are going to be further financially penalised, pushed further into poverty and into homelessness. And then the third thing is that the homelessness route should not be the first option for young people leaving care, but it is an important backstop for young people who find they need it. There are some reforms to the homelessness legislation happening, like the removal of intentional homelessness for young care leavers, which is really, really welcome. We'd like to see it go further and priority need in homelessness extended to all young people leaving care up to the age of 25. So there are some good things happening, and the Children Wellbeing and Schools Bill going through Parliament at the moment, which also extends corporate parenting responsibilities to a range of other public bodies, is really, really welcome. But at the same time, you know, we are seeing homelessness continue to rise amongst young people leaving care, and we're seeing some really concerning cuts to welfare, which we are very worried about. So some positive signs, but there's a lot more to do if we're really going to tackle homelessness amongst this group of young people. And if we don't do that, you know, all the things that you said, Ed, about what a home represents are absolutely true. We have to give young people leaving the care system, it's our duty as the state who has taken corporate parenting responsibility for young people to make sure that every single young person who leaves the care system has a stable, secure, safe home to go to.
Thank you. So CEO Sleep Out is a national charity, and what we can do is we can do three things. We can bring a message to the participants, the business leaders in the small to medium enterprise business space. we can pull together a campaign of public support that can reach the ears of policymakers, but crucially we fund. So we've given £4 million to charities on the front line, like the people sitting on this panel, to do what they do best and to change people's lives. And I think that that will have touched thousands of people across the UK. I think it's really, really important to make sure that that money goes to, for me, organisations that work with people to give them a sense of human connection, community, and stability. I was just in the panel before lunch about arts, sports, and technology, and I really, really do think that funding things like sports foundations that bring young people in through the hook of whatever their favourite sport is, but bring them together in a community setting where they can make friends, they can make bonds, and they can access even one person touching that person's life that believes in them, that could help make a difference. So I like to fund those organisations that have great outcomes when it comes to bringing people together. Sports, arts, I think as well. Arts is fundamental to bring people, to break down barriers, to connect people, but also flipping that as well and using the arts to tell the stories of some of the challenges that these people face, to break down that level of understanding and create that level of compassion that we need on a society-wide level, so that people can get behind this cause, so that this person I'm talking to, sitting in business thinking, what can I do? What can I do? Well, they can then understand some of the issues and actually make it their business to go and maybe give some people a chance, some young people who've been through the care system a chance.
Thank you. I think Ian talked about the impact of trauma, and I think we've heard today in a few of the different sessions about how difficult it can be for care experienced people to trust, having been let down by their families and social workers potentially, organisations that are there to support. So I think to try and combat that, two of the key things that we need to be doing better are planning and relationships, because both of those help build trust. Mark was saying about getting on the housing register at 16. I think one of the key stumbling blocks sometimes in local authorities is that your leaving care team can be quite separate from your looked after teams, and you might have a lot of experience through the PAs in leaving care teams who understand all about the housing system and how this works, but actually a young person might not even go to that team until, you know, a month or so before their 18th birthday. So, and the looked after social worker is focusing on the looked after placement. So I think that planning needs to happen much earlier and be more joined up. And that also means there's more time for trusting relationships to be built. Because I know when I was 18, I didn't believe anything that people told me. I kind of, thought, I'll be fine, I know what I'm doing. So I think you need to have people around you in your network who you do trust and who you do listen to, because until you're out there living on your own, you don't know what it's going to be like. So I think that planning and building those relationships are really key. And we've certainly seen, even with older care leavers in our housing project, people don't want to be assessed to within an inch of their lives. They don't want to be told what to do. They need to have control over their own decisions, where they're living, and set goals for themselves as well. So I think we need to be really including care experienced people in letting them set the plans, not just including them, but they need to lead their lives, and we're there to support with that rather than us setting the agenda.
Yeah, it's really difficult to add to all of that, because it's all just really poignant and correct, and I agree with everything everyone said. And I think for me, I'll probably take a bit of a philosophical stance on it all. I think that we probably need a bit of a paradigm shift in how we understand ourselves and each other. I think we need to acknowledge that our institutions are traumatized, and in some cases trauma-inducing. I think we need to understand that we don't become disconnected because of domestic violence, drug addiction, poverty, and all the geopolitical issues around the world. We have these things because we have become disconnected. And I think that some of the things that perpetuate some of these social challenges are that we are more positional than relational, that we're finding it harder and harder to be publicly authentic, and that we live in a society that seems to be more and more predicated on fear, desire, and confusion. So I think, that's a call for authentic leadership where people can start to be more real and form more connections. And I think, the pathway to healing, we have to think about relational trauma, and we have to think about relational healing. And I think we have to think about how do we legitimately connect with people, on a legitimate level, that speaks to their heart and soul and validates them and meets them where they're at, is willing to spend time with them where they are at, because that's the only way we can support people to move on. And that's been my experience.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of been at the end of the line when everybody's given really good stuff. So it just kind of, I suppose for me, adding to that is that so much of what our systems do is focus on crisis and short term. And that includes the housing offer, it includes care leaving. When you look at the stats again around the various cliff edges, the percentage that are care leavers that go into homelessness, but then in our services, those that are in service later on, 42% are care experienced. And in our scheme for serially excluded young people, 75% are care experienced. So all this kind of short term, and for me, the kind of solution is, it is what works for many young people that have family resources, that have that privilege, that have that security, that have that stability. What is it that works for them, and what do they do, and what are families able to do, and how can we do that? How can we replicate that for young people that have the corporate parent? How does the universal family work so that all of us take that responsibility to ensure that actually young people are able to have fun, to do daft things, to get into difficulties, to try things out and then, decide, no, I don't want that, I'd rather do this, I don't like that, I don't want to live here, all those things. How do we do that? Because as you said, Kerry, lots of young people, well, I'll go back home for a while, or a fallout with someone, I'll go back home for a while. But if you haven't got that option, then you end up in these crisis scenarios, and then we deal with crises. And Ian, your point about trauma, I think trauma-informed is really important. Since we invested in becoming a psychologically informed environment back in 2011 after the research into mental health issues and things around homelessness. And we've stuck with that all the way. And you cannot be psychologically informed environment without being trauma-informed. But it's beyond that, because it looks at, why do I behave in the way I do? And how does my behaviour impact in the ways that you might behave because of everything you've experienced? And it moves, because sometimes just trauma is, I've learned all about trauma. I can deal with you. I know you're traumatised. I'm being facetious, but do you know what I mean? Whereas actually psychologically informed is based on the fact we are all humans. We all have patterns. We all have experiences, and it leads to the way that we behave. And sometimes that is hardwired. And so we don't even know that we are defending intentions, good intentions of our organisations, but we are ignoring the actual experience that people have had. Oh, I'm not racist. We're not this. We're not that. We treat care leavers, we do. But actually, that's not been care leavers' experience. So again, it is about when we look systemically and we look at policy, we look at funding, we look at procedures, look at all the things that Mark's talked about. Also need to think about the wiring and the psychology and what's hardwired, because systems, really, we have hard-baked defense mechanisms we do not want to change. We say we do. We don't disagree with the principles of it. But do we do it? No, we don't. We carry on finding ways that continue doing the same thing, and then we blame the people that don't comply. And that's what we need to change. Fundamentally, we need a massive shift in relation to, I think, how we actually all look at those systems.
Love that.
Thank you, Jean, so much. We have Mark. I'm going to do a little wrap up. We do have about 3-4 minutes.
Yeah.
Quick questions. So
Yeah. Yeah, just to say, I mean, for people that have been around as long as I have, which is probably 40 years at this, you know, in 2015, you know, we through the Edward Timpson, who was the minister at the time, we decided that when we had a really good set of rights and entitlements to young people, and local authorities that were doing that and publicising the rights and entitlements to young people, that it made them more informed about making decisions, making choices, being clear of what was an offer from their leaving care team and from some partners. We introduced a local offer as a statutory guidance in 2017. We introduced corporate parenting principles. Now, a principle is lovely, but I've had people in health say to me, I like the principle, but I'm not going to change the practice that I do. In the last couple of years, what I said to Edward Timpson before he lost his job, which was probably 6 months after I'd come into post, was that what happens if the local offer and the corporate parenting principles are not nailing people's colours to the mast? He said, we will legislate. So that's where we are. We are going to legislate, so we will look at the local offer guidance. We will introduce a set of duties on government and every partner that sits in government and in local authorities. And we're introducing a housing offer, which means that local authorities have a statutory duty to list what they're doing about making sure that young people are not homeless, making sure they're not evicted, making sure they're not intentionally homeless. We're going to consult on the removing the 2 years, the cross-boundary rule, where you've got to have 2 years in a local authority before you can apply for social. We're going to remove that. So we're going to consult on it, but I want them to remove it. So for the first time in history, we will be tying the housing people to the floor and saying, what you're going to do about it, and it will be regulated against. So you will be Ofsteded, you will be looked at about what you're going to do about it. It's a starting point. We're hoping in the next couple of years, if we need to push that farther, then we will do. But legislation isn't always the answer, but sometimes you just got to go, let's bite the bullet, introduce it in legislation, and you're going to have to tell us what you're going to do for care leavers.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mark. That's really positive to hear. They're 5 minutes early, by the way. We're not late. So we will take... So I promise, I've got my watch. So we will take a couple of very quick questions. We'll be snappy, if that's OK. Are you willing to speak out? Or?
It's not a question.
Oh, please.
I think what the light bulb moment for me in this panel is there's so much knowledge within the panel and within the room. I'm sort of relatively new to all this. But the light bulb moment was what you said, and it brought home to me that the only way that we're going to change those fixed beliefs is if, when decisions are being made, there's 50% care experienced people making those decisions. And if there's that much knowledge, actual day-to-day knowledge, lived experience, that might make people think, okay, we really need to sort this out. It might just break down those barriers. I think any decisions that are made has got to have a big portion of people.
I really agree. We can't start to complete our understanding of what it's like to experience something until we truly and legitimately engage those who have lived through it. But I'd probably add to that as well. And what I'd say is that I've literally worked all around the world in this foster carers, social workers all around the world. And one of the things that I've realised is that people don't come into this line of work for the lucrative salaries and amazing job benefits. Go figure. Something has happened in their own lives that calls on them and resonates in them to go and respond to human suffering on some level. And I think what's really important is that we spend more time appreciating that, acknowledging that, supporting people to do their own psychological work, because therein lies their terrible gift. And I think the more we do some stuff around that and engage people based on our own experiences, because we've all got lived experience, it's not a category for the people that we work in. And we have to be careful we don't hide behind that veil of professionalism, because lots of harm can be done there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. And I agree. And Mark, was it? Someone said, imagine if it was your child. And there's a lot of parents here, so I think we'll stand by that. Okay, I think we can wrap up. I was going to cheekily just do 2 reflections. The first one is just something no one's mentioned, and I was just going to mention rents. So I run the largest portfolio of housing for care leavers and young people in the country, so I have some insight into this. The fact we're actually taking homeless young people and putting them into an accommodation project where the service charge is about 1/3 of their income, and that's just to pay for the communal lighting, and then all we're we're putting into B&Bs, and it's like there's no way on earth anyone is going to enter an employment market, or uni or college and things like that. And I think that is a systemic, just a no-brainer that really frustrates me. Just forgive me for dropping that one in, but I think it's one. I did a wrap-up in the session we did this morning, and actually, and it really harks back to what Fatima is trying to do, because actually everything we're talking about is doable, but it's about political will, it's about leadership, and we show leadership in our own spaces, but actually there's stuff, and I'm sure we can probably share it, there's stuff, oh yeah, I could do more about that, and I'm kind of learning and listening from colleagues on the panel. So actually, what Fatima is trying to do is to make a huge amount of noise. She is not going to be the policy, she's not going to be the minister, but she's making that noise because there's the will to do all of these things and prioritise people who experience care. So I kind of think it's that will and that intent, and set the bar with legislation, and then everything else will follow. So forgive me if I have the last word, it's my indulgent, but hey, I facilitated. I'm going to thank everyone on the panel, so Mark, Lisa, Katherine, Bianca, Kerry, Ian, Jean, thank you. Please, the knowledge here is really impressive, so thank you. Yeah. So guys, I've no idea if there's brownies, but it is now a tea break before, so thank you very much.